Hey guys, welcome to BP, the Bible Perspective. Welcome to part 2 of Never Bring Ignorance to a Debate, dissecting the Larry Elder's interview on the Breakfast Club. Before we continue, please like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome. This is part 2 of um, the interview. Now, the interview with Larry Elders on the Breakfast Club. Now, so why is Larry Elders appearing on the Breakfast Club? Now, about a couple of weeks before, you had another conservative, Vivek Ramaswamy, who appeared on the Breakfast Club. There could be a correlation here. Both are running for president as conservative, as Republicans, doing their best not to criticize Donald Trump. As I said before, I think that they both know they're not going to win. They're just not going to win, okay? But maybe they hope to get a seat at the table, okay? I'm reminded of Ben Carson, the famed surgeon who ran for president and lost horribly, but then Trump brought him on in his cabinet. Just my opinion. But the point of my deconstructing this interview is, in both cases with Vivek Ramaswamy and Larry Elders, who are Republicans and who dare to go on a liberal show. Now, this is without a doubt a liberal show. So the question is, what do they hope to gain? And there could be a lot of reasons to that. I mean, there can be a lot of reasons. They know they're not going to win the audience, okay? At best, they may cipher some of the audience. They may gain some supporters, but that's, if they want to build like a platform, this is certainly not the place to do it. Now, another aspect is that they also could show their true audience, who are conservative, that see, we reach out to all. We reach out to the liberals, whom they defame, right? Who they, really, really chastise as godless people. So Larry's going to bring the typical Republican talking point at this interview. My criticism is, don't bring, when I say never bring ignorance to a debate, the response from the Breakfast Club. Now, what you have here is DJ Envy and Charlemagne the God, and then their guest commentator, Teslan Figueroa. Okay, I think I did mispronounce her name last week. In part 1, so I apologize for that, and I apologize if I'm not pronouncing it accurately here. But she kind of brings the news. She brings kind of the information to the table. One of the problems is her responses to both Vivek Ramaswamy and Larry Elders, that not doing the homework, not counteracting his argument with information. And that's the problem here. That's why I say don't bring ignorance to a debate. Larry Elders is skilled at delivering his talking points. If you watch pretty much any conservative like Larry Elders and Vivek Ramaswamy, they fire all kinds of stats at you. Now, if you don't do your homework, you can't refute the numbers. Like, we are dissecting some of the stats that Larry is giving, some of the information that he's giving. And it's not necessarily that they're outright lying. is how they pick and choose to present certain facts while leaving out others. But if you're not prepared, then it looks like Larry won. Looks like he's decimating them. Now he's decimating them from the standpoint is that they don't have good answers or good responses, like especially Charlemagne the God. Teslan basically starts to kind of, to me, go off on tangents that really, it just sometimes are not pointed. Okay, in other words, her response, and again, I don't want to jump ahead. That's why I'm kind of stumbling here. I don't want to jump ahead. I'll address it when we get to those points. So my biggest point here is that Larry is skilled at, number one, filibustering. So he'll keep just saying the same thing over and over and over and over and over again, and then he will also deflect. And if you don't have the answers, how do you correct that? Like he's going to ask them, what is systematic racism, and they're going to give really just kind of a weak answer. But again, I don't want to get ahead. So let's dive into this again. I'm going to start it. I'm going to let some of it play, and then we're going to continue on with his presentation here. I want you to hear some of the things again that he is saying.
Number one social problem in America by far is the epidemic not of COVID, but of fatherlessness.
So now I want you to keep that in mind, that he said that the number one epidemic is fatherless. So keep that in mind. The number one epidemic is fatherless.
70% of black kids today enter the world without a father in the home married to the mother, up from 25% back in 1965. Now 25% of white kids enter the world today without a father in the home married to the mother. And the stats are clear. Even Barack Obama once cited them. If you're raised without a dad, you're 5 times more likely to be poor and commit crime, 9 times more likely to drop out of school, and 20 times more likely to end up in jail.
So where are they getting those numbers again? Notice he says you're 5 times likely to drop out of school. You're going to end up in jail. And where did he get those numbers from? Notice he doesn't cite this stat right here. It's a made up number because it's just simply not true. It's just simply not true. When you talk about the mere absence of a father in the home, and I dealt with this in part one, so I won't. I'm tempted to get to relitigate it, but I'm not. Let's move on.
Happened in the mid-'60s with, I think, the best of intentions. A Democrat named Lyndon Johnson launched what he called the War on Poverty. And since then, we have incentivized women to marry the government and incentivized men to abandon their financial and moral responsibility.
Okay, so first of all, when he said we have incentivized, now, again, I dealt with this in part one, but again, let me just quickly say this. First of all, it's not the entire black community, as I said before. He is going to contradict this without them even realizing that he's contradicting. Again, the unemployment rate today, even if you go back to the 60s, what was the unemployment rate of that time? What is the unemployment rate today? So right there, it couldn't be, if more black people are working than they are unemployed, he said they're not going to have jobs. They're going to drop out of school. They're going to go to jail, which means then that the incarceration rate should be extremely high. The unemployment rate should be extremely high. Why? Because of the absence of fathers. But this is how he characterized it, by saying, using the term the black community, and you notice how careful he is to say that 25% of whites, even though that's a low figure, 25% of whites have fatherless homes. Well, understand that that's he says of whites, Now, he doesn't say of blacks, but he says of whites. So 25% of whites, right? He doesn't say the white community. He doesn't say that the white community has a problem because to me, wouldn't 25% be high for a community? Wouldn't, for especially for a superior community, especially for a community that would have it together. So if you say 25% of whites, right? But yet he says 78% of blacks are born without a father. Therefore, the black community. Now, let's also keep in mind he's black, grew up in the black community. His father grew up without a father. We won't, okay? So, how you characterize, see, this is the biggest issue here. How you characterize one group of people and how you glorify the other. Meaning how you certainly demonize black people, but white people, oh no, they got their act together.
You know, when I say this to people, the pushback I get is, well, there are lots of things that are going on, systemic racism, poverty. Here's the problem. If you look at a young black male aged 10 to 43, that's young to me because I'm 71 years old. A young black man in that demo is 13 times more likely to be murdered than a young white man, same demo. Young black man, real young, 19 and under, the number one cause of preventable death is homicide. Almost always
Now you notice he said preventable death. I want you to hear what he says now. Preventable death. Notice what he lists.
at the hands of another young black male. Same demo for whites, the number one cause of preventable death is unintentional deaths. That includes drug overdoses, automobile accidents, drownings. It's not until they get to number 4 that death is the cause.
Now let's stop for a moment because I didn't mention this in part 1, but I want to mention this here. Again, notice how, just the opioid crisis. So notice that word crisis there. The opioid crime, where you have the just an exceeding amount of black people, white people who are overdosing on opioids. Now and again, the larger number is white people. In 1 year alone, 60,000 people died from drug overdose. Now so where are they getting these drugs? Where are they getting the opioids? See, when he says unintentional, that's just plain silly. Unintentional, like unintentional. Well, I didn't mean to. Well, but there was some criminal acts involved in that because a lot of times they had drugs. They were taking more drugs than they should have taken. Okay, and then who was prescribing the drugs? So there was crime involved in here. But notice he said also accidents. But what he doesn't tell you is about DUI, the high rate of DUI, the death caused by DUI. Again, how you characterize something is very important. But black people, no, bad. When he says that more black people are killed by black people, sure they are. When he said, the stats, when you have I think he said 10 to 43, is more likely to be killed by a black person. But he doesn't say within a certain neighborhood. But in other words, is it in every neighborhood that you live in? Is it every black person? In other words, I live in the black community. I said it before. Do I step out in the black community and think that I'm going to, duck? Am I ducking? And oh my God, gunfire all night. It's like Beirut. No, but in certain neighborhoods, yes. And we're going to explain why later.
In America, 60% of the shootings, the robberies, and the homicides are committed by black people, often against other black people. Of the homicides in this country, half of them are black victims, almost all killed by other blacks.
Now, I said that again, remember, The same can be said with almost any group. Okay, so yes, you could say out of the homicide victims, 53% were black, 41% were white. Notice he's not mentioning that. Okay, and if we could break it down to almost in every group, you can have high numbers in every group. Okay, um, I won't go into I won't go into all the other stats, but like the again high birth rates, um, unwed birth rates. Again, if you break them down to groups, uh, pretty much every group is high. And especially my thing is if you're going to say from a white perspective, the superior race, their numbers is extremely high. He said 25% is more, probably 40, which is extremely high if you're a part of the group that is superior, that has it all together, right? Okay, and I am being funny with that term. That the whites have it all together. Yes, I'm being very facetious with that. My point is that if you're going to say that here the problems of black people without even talking about how black people got there, the origins of it, and even some of the now current causes of why black people are the way they do. He downplays that, and this is his whole construction of his stats and what he's citing. Well, the whole issue here that it is to again demonize one group of people, black people, while deflecting the guilt from white people. He's a master at this. Here we go.
How do you explain that if it isn't for the absence of fathers? Are you prepared to say black people are just genetically inclined to commit more crime? I doubt it. And the go-to reaction often is poverty and systemic racism. Here's the problem.
Okay, now um, again, he's not citing one stat or report or statistic. How is he coming up with the fact that the mere absence of fathers is why the black community is in the condition that it is in? And remember, when he says the black community, he's painting the black community with a wide one brush, and he won't do that with white people. He certainly won't do that with white people.
1940, when there was blatant racism. This is before Brown versus Board of Education, before the Civil Rights Act of 64. KKK was still alive and well. 87% of blacks lived under the poverty line. Now it's about 14%. You can't blame it on poverty. You can't blame it on racism. It is the breakdown of the nuclear intact family, and neither side is talking about it. The left doesn't talk about it because they caused it with the welfare state, and our side does not talk about it because if you're white, you'll be accused of dissing single moms who are heroically raising these kids, or you'll be accused of being.
Okay. First of all, again, where are you getting this numbers from, right? And uh, if you're going to say that the pre-1965 constitutionally protected, constitutionally legalized racism against black people, I understand that. Now, what he's trying to say is that black people were better off or living better under those conditions. Now, what he doesn't talk about, of course, is, and I said this again, this is a bit across the board, the mere presence of fathers. He's not talking about alcoholism, abuse, incest, pedophilia, all of these different things here that what was the impact of this on any group of people, on any mindset of people. Okay, in other words, he's just not talking about it. He's cherry picking certain ills and then saying, "Oh, well, back during Jim Crow, back during slavery, blacks lived better." That's simply not true. And again, the problem with that is tr- treating his set of figures here as if this applied to the entire black population. Okay, It applies to a segment of the population for sure. But even again, he's going to get into the contradiction of the employment numbers. When he said 87% of the people live below the poverty, that's true, but they were working. But he also is not telling you why. Well, he admits that it's racism. He admits that it's racism. All right, let's continue.
A racist, or if you're black, you'll be accused, as I was by the LA Times, of being the black face of white supremacy. Nobody's talking about that. I am.
Okay, well, they're not accusing you of being the black face of white supremacy because you speak out against these issues. You go out of your way to demonize black people and then to also protect white people, to deflect white guilt. That's why people uh, criticize you, call you a sellout, call you Uncle Tom, call you a coon, and all that. That's why they do that. Keep that in mind. That's why.
Am.
What are the reasons, if your statistics are right, what are the reasons that you think fathers aren't in the home?
As I said, it's because in the mid-'60s, Lyndon Johnson launched what he called the War on Poverty. In Charlemagne, literally, they sent social workers door to door in the inner city. I remember this, advising women of the availability of welfare provided there was no man in the house. It created an economic incentive for women to marry the government. Same thing with whites.
Now, let me just say this. What he just said was a lie. In other words, Lyndon Johnson did not institute, his policies aimed at black people. And then the institutions themselves, the welfare institutions, were then going door to door telling black women that if you stay on welfare, but you can't be married. But look at all this money you're gonna get. That's just a lie. No. They You did have social workers going in certain areas, but now watch this. Predominantly in larger cities like New York, Chicago, maybe LA, okay? In other words, they were making sure that if you were going to be on welfare, that you did not have, a husband who was working, you did not have extra income, that the aim was that it was to ensure, or at least try to ensure, that those who were on welfare qualified to be on welfare. Now, I agree, it was jacked up. I agree. You had people who, in my opinion, targeted the black community, disenfranchised the black community, without a doubt. But what I'm saying is, he's trying to say that black people who were doing Jim Crow and slavery were morally better off than when the Democrats, because again, this is what his argument is. He is demonizing the Democrats in favor of glorifying the Republicans, to which I would then ask him, what have the Republicans done, period, for black people? All right, here we go.
In 1965, 8% of whites entered the world without a father in the home married to the mother. Now it's about 25%, also up threefold. Look at census data, 1910, 1920, 1930, in places like Milwaukee, Chicago, Philadelphia. A young black kid was slightly more likely to be brought into a world with a father in the home married to the mother than a young white kid. We have incentivized this kind of bad behavior.
Well, again, where are these numbers coming from? That during this time, the time frame that he cited, that more black kids were being born to married homes versus white kids. That's the first thing. And again, what he's not talking about is, or I should say, the deception here is the mere presence of black people. In other words, the mere presence of, the mere presence of fathers was, what provided better homes. Okay.
Behavior, and it's had a disproportionately bad effect on the black community.
Let me ask you a question. What do white people do wrong, Larry?
Now, I'm going to sort of, before he answers that, let me also say something about Larry's position that, because Charlemagne asked a good question. He's not going to follow up on it. So that's kind of my criticism here. He's not going to follow up on it. He's not going to kind of push him or stick him to say, okay, what the heck are you saying? But if the mere presence of fathers produce great families and great people in society, what do you do with spring break? And just understand this. Think about this. Think about spring break. Understand spring break. When you look about the thousands of kids who typically, right, on spring break from college, you can almost say probably the majority of those spring break kids come from two-parent homes. But look at the lewdness and look at all of the debauchery and stuff that goes on at spring break. For that matter, how about what goes on within colleges themselves, high school themselves, you see. So again, this mischaracterization of the great white society. No, they were sinful as well, and they did sinful things. Okay.
What do you mean? What do white people do? I'm not worried about white people. I'm worried about what's going on with us.
But if there's
Now he's not worried about what he's certainly not worried about what white people do, especially the wrong, because that's not what his point is. His point is to deflect from that. But he certainly don't care about. He does not care about what goes on with black people. He's not looking to solve that.
if there's systemic racism in this country, which we know it is.
No, I don't say there is. You say there is. I don't believe that.
Oh, you don't believe there's
No,
systemic
there used to
racism?
be, obviously. Tell me what you think the number one systemic example of systemic racism is in America.
Oh man, there's so many.
Just give me the most important one you think.
But at the top of mind, I probably maybe say mass incarceration. Maybe.
Really?
Okay. Now, before I let him answer that, and I'll probably let him continue this in part 3. So here's a question he asked about systemic racism. In order to answer the question about systemic racism, and you notice Charlemagne could not give an answer because he's used to answering the question or talking about it within, his comfort level here. And so he's going to bring up mass incarceration. We'll deal with that later, but mass incarceration. All right. But understand the idea of systemic racism, and Larry's getting ready to crush that, because in order to understand his argument, you first have to define what systemic racism is. And that's the problem. You have to understand what that is. You have to define what systemic racism is. So from a legal perspective, systemic racism from a legal is done away, has been done away. The constitutionally protected, legalized racism during slavery and Jim Crow was done away in the mid-60s, the mid-1960s. So the argument now becomes, when we say what is systematic racism, the problem is not from a legal standpoint. Larry is going to skillfully say that there's no racism, in which he will be correct. The legalized, the legal institutional law of racism against black was done away in the mid-60s. So he's right on that. But does that mean racism is over? When we talk about racism from the standpoint of in the heart, right? We talk about racism in the heart. So what happened in 1865? So, well, let's go back. What happened in 1776? When the Constitution was written and enacted, and it said all men were created equal, that meant except for black people. So now you go, let's advance some 80 years, and then we come to 1965, and the most bloody civil war, and that's telling in itself, the most bloody civil war to date fought on American soil was over the issue of slavery, how some Americans thought about black people enough to fight for it, the bloodiest war. The law changed. So what happened when the law changed? Did hearts change? To that, we'll pick this up in part 3. I'll pick this up in part 3 and continue with this thought. So don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome. Till next time, I'll see you in part 3 of Don't Bring Ignorance to a Debate.